So taking the hammer to your bike might just be the most painful moment you'll ever have as a home bike mechanic. But soon that might just be a painful memory in the history books, as Trek has now hinted that they will adopt the T47 bottom bracket standard for the 30mm spindles, and with Specialized also going threaded bottom bracket for their high-end stuff. Might be a shift in the industry. Meanwhile, Pressfit bottom brackets is a reality we just have to accept, but I gotta say it hasn't been that bad for me personally. Apart from my Mason Bocce, all my previous road bikes has been Pressfit, either Pressfit 30 or BB86, and despite popular opinion that they are the work of the devil, I have had zero issues and no creaking bottom brackets or stuff like that, so I can't really complain too much. I would prefer not needing to mess around with press tools and hammers to change the bottom bracket, but it's never been a deal breaker for me when choosing a new frame. There is removal tools out there now that actually pull your bottom brackets, your cups or your bearings without the use of brute force, but depending on BB and the BB shell, there are still combinations that those tools don't really work with. But I digress, that's not really the point of this video. So if you've seen the build video of this open up, you might remember that I mentioned I had some pretty substantial bearing drags from the Easton bottom bracket, and while it's been smooth and dead silent, it's still been like mentally bothering me knowing that bearing drag is there. It did get a bit better after the first few rides, but it's still a lot stiffer than anything I had before. Spinning the crank without the chain, it doesn't really turn more than one revolution, which is definitely stiffer than it should be, I think, at least from my experience, having used a lot of different bottom brackets. I remember the bearings being pretty stiff before I pressed it into the frame, but I figured that would just loosen up after riding it a bit. I don't know if that was a faulty bottom bracket from the beginning or something went wrong when I pressed the bottom bracket into the frame. I will just assume that it's my fault and get on with it. So much for not having any problems with Pressfit's bottom brackets. So while we wait for the cycling industry to revert back to 100% threaded bottom brackets, I wanted to try the next best thing, and that is the so-called Threadfit bottom brackets. The bearings are pressed into metal cups that actually thread together in the middle, and that way it will keep both cups perfectly aligned in the bottom bracket shell and minimize any kind of movement, creaking or stuff like that. It also means the installation will be a bit simpler. At least that's what I'm hoping. There's a few brands out there doing this thread together kind of design. For example, Wheels Manufacturing and Enduro Bearings with their Torque Tite, I think they're called, bottom brackets. The one I went for here is from Token, just because it was the easiest to get my hands on here in Japan locally, and it's not that crazy expensive as the Enduro one, for example. I totally forgot to film the actual weigh-in, but it came in at 109 grams, which is 8 grams heavier than my Easton. It also came with a wave washer and a few shims that I thought I wouldn't have had to use at all, but more on that later. So the principle is the same for all these Threadfit bottom brackets, but one thing that's a bit different about this Token one is the metal sleeve that the bearings sit in have a composite material on the end that will conform slightly to the bottom bracket shell for a snug fit, even if it's somewhat uneven. If that's just marketing gibberish or something, I don't know. This video is more about the concept of using these type of threaded bottom brackets for Pressfit frames rather than the Token BB specifically. So now I just need to do the most painful part, and that is to remove the old bottom bracket and get this thing installed. So there's a few ways to remove a Pressfit cup. A headset cup removal tool is probably the best way, I would imagine, but I don't know if they expand enough for the larger BB30 cups. Maybe some of you guys out there has experience with it. If so, let me know in the comments. I did not have that tool at my disposal, so I used this cheap removal tool from Bikehand that's more made to remove the bearings themselves rather than the cups, but I have used similar tools for the Shimano Pressfit BB86 cups without problems, so I thought it would work just the same. Unfortunately, it didn't, as it simply removed the bearings with the cup still left in the frame. So it was time to go a bit rogue with a hammer and a long threaded rod I had lying around from another DIY project, tapping around the cup, alternating sides, sketchy as hell, but eventually the cups gave up together with my broken sole. Not the optimal solution that I would recommend, but it got the job done in the end. Needless to say, the cups are pretty much unusable now. A quick clean in and around the bottom bracket shell, and it was time to twist this token BB into place. The BB comes with two super thin metal shims that goes on either cup. I'm guessing this is to protect the frame when threading the cups flush against the BB shell, so definitely don't forget those if you use this particular bottom bracket. Instructions say to grease both the thread in the middle and the cups themselves, but I'm going a bit off script and using my secret sauce, the Wakos brake protector. I will use this on the cups themselves instead of grease, as to this day this stuff hasn't given me a single creaking bottom bracket, and you might have seen me going on about this in other videos, but yeah, it's the shite. A thin layer in the shell and a layer around the cups, and just to protect the bearings from getting this super sticky brake protector stuff on them, I kept the bearing covers on as a safety precaution. The tools you need to install these kind of cups might vary between brands. In the case of Token, I needed two 16-notch external cup tools. Those will fit the 48.5 outer diameter cups. I decided to go with one socket style from Park Tool, the BBT27, that I can attach to my torque wrench, and one flat wrench, the BBT29, that I used just to hold the non-drive side in place as I turn the other side. The first bit I could just screw by hand, just to align the cups correctly into the BB shell. And then for the last bit, I used my torque wrench to tighten it down to the specified 25 to 30 Newton meters. I love when I specify this, so there's no need to second guess if you're too tight or too loose. Much nicer than messing around with press tools, in my opinion. So with the cups in place, I gave the bearing a spin, and they felt very nice and smooth, so everything looked very promising. I thought I just needed to put the crank back on, and I was ready to head out and break all my previous PRs with my new lightning fast bottom bracket and about 6 months of training. However, after getting the crank back on, it was clear that the preload collar on the crank alone wasn't enough to get the play out of the cranks. I was probably missing around 4 to 5 millimeters, so that means that the installed width of this Token bottom bracket is narrower than the Easton bottom bracket. I since done a little research online, and similar situation seems to happen when pairing the Easton crank with an Enduro bottom bracket, for example. If you have paired your Easton EC90 SL crank with a non-Easton bottom bracket, I'm curious to know if you experienced this issue as well. So definitely let me know in the comments if you did. Looking at the instruction that came with the bottom bracket to see if I was missing something, even the provided shims, it would not be enough, and since the Easton cranks have that preload collar, I shouldn't need to use the wave washer, at least in theory. But looking up the instructions online, they seem to have updated the instructions compared to the one that came with my bottom bracket. It now shows that you need to use the wave washer with a BB386 crank, which in my mind shouldn't really be necessary with these Easton cranks, but who am I to argue? Anyway, I put two shims on either side of the crank and the wave washer on the non-dry side as per instruction. And after I did that, I could preload the preload collar correctly and remove any kind of play in the crank. This solution doesn't really feel perfect to me, to be totally honest. At least I got the play out of the crank, and giving it a spin afterwards without the chain on, I could definitely see a massive improvement from the Easton bottom bracket. So I was at least happy with that. I just need to put the wheels back on and a chain and head out for a ride. So I had the first shakedown ride the other day, and everything spun really nice and smoothly. But that wave washer and all those shims, I wasn't super stoked on that solution. Kind of hacky. And I started to think about if I could find something else to take up that slack. So then it hit me, I still had those bearing covers left over from the Easton bottom bracket that are a few millimeters thick. So I went home, took the crank off for the 100th time, removed the shims and the wave washer, put those Easton bearing covers on each side of the crank, and then I could adjust the preload collar almost exactly to the same amount that I had on the Easton bottom bracket itself. So there's probably some kind of spacer set you can buy out there, but this actually worked pretty nice in my opinion. Still kind of hacky for sure, but I can live with that as long as everything works fine. So all in all, everything is running smoothly right now, but it was definitely a bit more fiddly than I thought it would be. I still think it's a better solution than a proper Pressfit bottom bracket though. Removing the bottom bracket should be a bit easier as well. We'll see about that in the future. So I think that's it for this video. If you find it interesting or helpful in any way, feel free to leave a like. It's always appreciated. And subscribe if you want to see more of this bike nerdery stuff. If you do, I will catch you in the next one. But it's still a lot stiffer than anything I had before.